A Café Between Worlds. Written by Finn Wilder. Chapter 1. It was the windows that drew me in. Tall, golden-lit panes that stretched wide and open to a blue so deep it almost didn't look real. Sea, sky, green cliffs in the distance. And a stillness, not quiet, not empty, but still, that ran all the way down the street outside. I hadn't meant to stop. It was a stopover town, nothing more. As a journalist for a small-town rag, I was meant to be heading inland for a festival write-up, something loud and forgettable. But I missed the bus. Or maybe I didn't. Anyway, the cafe was open. There was music playing, soft and old, the kind that sounds like it belongs on a record player, and the air inside smelled warm, fresh ground coffee, a hint of citrus, and something floral I couldn't place. The counter curved around like an embrace, all polished wood and copper machines. There were plants, light, shadows. And behind the counter, a barista. He looked young, 17, maybe 20. It was hard to tell. He wore a black apron with a little cat face stitched onto the front, and his hair was tousled like he'd dried it in the wind. But what stood out, what always stands out even when you're trying not to stare, were the ears. Large, feline, soft-looking, perched atop his head. A necko. You didn't see many outside the capital. I'd maybe seen 2 in my life, both in passing, both in places louder and flashier than this. But here he was, quiet, ordinary, sweeping coffee grounds into a tin with the same calm focus you'd expect from anyone behind a counter. He didn't look surprised to see me. When he looked up, he smiled, a small, genuine thing that reached his eyes. "Coffee?" he asked, voice light. "Or something else?" There was something about him, a sense that he'd already guessed the answer. I ordered a black coffee, mostly out of habit, and he nodded as if he already knew. He moved with that unhurried kind of grace you only ever see in people who've done the same job for years and still enjoy it. Everything had a rhythm. Press, pour, serve. And all the while that small, easy smile stayed in place like it belonged to him more than the apron did. The cafe wasn't crowded. A few people spaced out in the kind of way that suggested they came often. One man reading a book with a plate of crumbs in front of him. An older woman knitting, her tea steaming beside her. A couple by the window holding hands, not talking. The place didn't feel like a secret. It felt like a pause, like something set aside from the rest of the day. The cat-eared boy brought over the coffee without calling out a name. "Here you go," he said quietly, setting the cup down gently. "No rush?" He didn't walk away immediately, just lingered for a moment, as if weighing whether to say more. "You're not from here," he said softly, not a question. "No," I replied, "just passing through." He nodded. People say that a lot. At first. He gave that same small smile, then turned back toward the counter. "Thanks, Eli," said the older woman with the knitting, as he passed her table. She reached for her cup. "This is just how I like it." "Good," he said gently, with a slight bow of his head. I remembered. So that was his name, Eli. It suited him. The coffee was good. Strong, but not bitter. It had that sort of brightness that makes you pause after the first sip, not because it's surprising, but because it's exactly what you needed without realizing. Eli moved through the cafe quietly, checking on tables without interrupting anyone's peace. He never hovered, never made small talk unless it was offered. But people smiled when he approached, not out of politeness, something warmer than that. Familiarity, maybe, or fondness. At one point, He leaned down to refill the older woman's tea without being asked. She glanced up and murmured, "Thank you, love." He just nodded and moved on. A minute later, he placed a blueberry muffin at the side of the couple's table. Neither of them had ordered it. "How did you—" the man started. "You always share one," Eli said softly, with a flicker of a smile. "Figured I'd save you the trouble." The woman laughed under her breath and gave his hand a light, grateful squeeze before he walked away. I watched him for a while. Not because I was trying to write anything, not yet, just because there was something steadying about the way he existed in the space, like he belonged not just to the cafe, but as part of it, like a fixture, a warm one. The sea outside glittered beyond the window. Somewhere down the street, a bell rang. Nobody turned to look. I didn't check the time. I didn't want to. I was halfway through the cup when the man at the next table turned slightly in his chair. Late 60s, maybe older, in a wool jumper that had lost its shape but not its warmth. "First time?" he asked, not unkindly. I nodded. "That obvious?" He gave a small smile. New faces always have a certain look, like they're listening for something they can't quite hear. I glanced around the room and I kind of understood what he meant. "Feels like that kind of place," I nodded. He didn't reply straight away, just took a sip of his tea, eyes on the window. Then after a moment he said, "People tend to come back, even when they don't plan to." There was no weight in his voice, no mystery forced into it. Just a statement, like someone commenting on the weather. "Good coffee will do that," I said lightly. "Name's Thomas," he said, offering a hand. "If you're around again, I'll be here." I shook his hand slowly, still watching Eli move across the room, topping up someone's water without a word. "I'm not sure I will be," I said. Thomas just smiled knowingly. That's what most people say at first. Eventually I drained the last of the coffee. The light outside had shifted, warmer, lower. I pulled out my phone to check the time and froze. Missed it. The next bus out wasn't until morning. The app confirmed it with that calm, indifferent certainty only transport schedules seem to have. 1 bus a day, 1 shot, gone. I let the screen dim and sat back in the chair. I should have felt annoyed, a little stuck. But instead I just stared out the window, watching the sky turn that in-between shade that always comes before dusk. The cafe seemed even quieter now. Not empty, just slower, like it had softened along with the light. Eli passed by my table, carrying a tray of empty glasses. He paused. "Something wrong?" he asked gently. "I missed my bus," I said. "Didn't realize the time." He tilted his head slightly. "It happens?" "Any chance this place doubles as a hotel?" I said, half joking. That soft smile again. "Afraid not. But there's a guest house just up the hill. White building, green shutters. Tell them Eli sent you. They'll take good care of you." He said it with the kind of ease that made it sound like this had happened before, maybe more than once. "Thanks," I said, standing and slinging my bag over my shoulder. "Guess I'm staying the night." Eli just gave a small nod, as if everything was proceeding exactly as it should. "See you tomorrow, then," he said. And the strange thing was, he didn't say it like a question. The bell above the door gave a soft ring as I stepped inside the cafe. Same warmth, same low music, same salt-tinged air that drifted in through the open windows. It felt unchanged, like the whole place had been reset overnight, ready for another quiet performance. Eli was behind the counter, arranging slices of lemon cake under a glass dome. He looked up as I walked in and smiled. that same small, knowing curve of the lips. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, a little slower, like I was still catching up to the fact that I was back. "Sleep all right?" he asked, setting the dome down gently. "Yeah," I said, stepping up to the counter. "The woman who runs the guest house gave me a pot of tea and a hot water bottle like it was 1953. I think I might have time-travelled." Eli gave a soft laugh. "That sounds like May. She still writes people's names in a little leather book. Doesn't believe in computers." "I don't think she believed I existed until she'd written me down," I grinned. He nodded, still smiling. "You're officially part of the town now." There was a pause, not awkward, just full of the kind of space this place seemed to invite. "Same coffee?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "Surprise me." He looked pleased by that. "All right." I took the same seat by the window. The light was different now, cooler, earlier. Outside, a fishing boat drifted slowly across the water. Inside, a new quiet had settled. People were beginning to arrive in ones and twos, not rushing, just arriving. Eli brought over a tall glass filled with something warm and golden, steam curling lazily from the top. "Chamomile, cinnamon, and something else I'm not allowed to name," he said. "People tend to like it more when they don't know." I raised an eyebrow. "That legal?" He grinned. "Mostly." Then he turned and walked away. The drink was warm and soft and slightly sweet, familiar in a way I couldn't place. It tasted like something I might have had as a child, though I couldn't tell you where or when. Whatever was in it, Eli was right. It was better not knowing. I sat back and watched the morning unfold. There was something unusual about the rhythm of the place. It didn't run on the clock so much as instinct. Nobody looked rushed. Nobody stared at their phones. Conversations drifted in low tones, and even the clatter of cups and cutlery felt quieter than it should have been, like the cafe had decided very gently what kind of noise it allowed. Eli moved from table to table with his usual grace. He smiled at everyone, but not the way baristas in city cafes do, trained, transactional. This was something else, familiar, gentle. People responded without thinking, a slight touch on the arm, a murmured thank you, a look that said, "I'm glad you're still here." The couple from the day before were back. They didn't sit at the same table, but near it. This time they spoke. Low, quick sentences, like they were working through something private. Eli passed them a pot of something dark and fragrant without a word. They both paused, nodded, and poured. And then the chair across the table from me shifted. A woman in her 30s, maybe older. Wavy black hair pulled into a loose scarf, paint under her fingernails. She wore a faded red jacket and carried a sketchbook so thick it looked like it might have doubled as a doorstop. She didn't ask, just sat, like we'd agreed on it earlier. "I'm not interrupting, am I?" she asked. "No," I said, a little too quickly. "Not at all." She offered a crooked smile. "It's just, that's my chair. Not by law or anything. It just usually is." She opened the sketchbook and flipped to a clean page. "Don't mind me," she added. "I'm on a deadline, sort of." Eli appeared at her side, as if summoned. "Same again?" he asked. "Please," she said, not looking up. "And a blueberry scone, if your mysterious instincts allow it." Eli's smile twitched, and he nodded. "They do today." He disappeared into the back, and I was left turning over that odd little phrase, mysterious instincts. Clearly a private joke between them, but what did it mean? She began sketching with fast, light movements. "I haven't seen you here before," she said. "First time yesterday," I replied. She nodded, still drawing. That's how it usually starts. The woman sketched with the kind of focus that felt half meditative, half mechanical, like her hand knew what to do, even if her mind was somewhere else entirely. I watched the lines take shape. Not faces or full scenes, just fragments, an elbow resting on a table, a plant hanging in the window, the curved spine of a chair, pieces of the café captured in charcoal. "You're a writer, aren't you?" she said, still not looking up. I hesitated. What gave it away? The way you look at things, like you're waiting for them to mean something. She turned the sketchbook slightly so I could see. One of the drawings looked uncannily like Eli's hand mid-pour, steam rising from a mug. "You're not the first," she said, "to come here and start scribbling." "Is that what people do here?" I asked. She shrugged. "Some of them. Some paint. Some write letters they never send. One woman came in every day for a week just to rearrange the sugar packets. Said it helped her think." I smiled. "That's oddly comforting." She finally looked up, studied me with that kind of artist's glance that feels more like a scan than a stare. "You're trying to figure out why you're still here," she said. "Maybe I just like the coffee." She gave a knowing smile. "Sure, that too." At that moment, Eli returned with her drink and the blueberry scone, perfectly golden, warm enough to fog the plate slightly. "Thanks," she said softly. "You're spoiling me." "Just encouraging good habits," Eli replied. Then he glanced at me. "Want anything else?" I looked at the drink, still half full. "No, this is great, whatever it is." He smiled. "It doesn't have a name, not officially. But the regulars call it Rest Easy." The artist raised an eyebrow at that. "When did we start calling it that?" Eli gave a light shrug. "You tell me. You were the first one who said it." She smiled, almost embarrassed. "I thought that was just me being tired." He turned to me again. "Names tend to stick around here." And with that, he disappeared toward the back of the cafe. I pulled my notebook from my bag, the battered kind, spine creased, corners curled. I flipped it open, expecting to pick up where I'd left off, notes for an article about an arts festival 2 towns over. It was due in 4 days, just interviews, quotes, something light and tidy. Easy enough to turn in, easy enough to forget. Instead, I turned to a fresh page and began to write. There's a cafe by the sea that feels like it's always been waiting for you. Quiet, ordinary, warm in ways that are hard to explain. The barista's name is Eli, young, gentle, not the type to fill silences. But there's something about the way he moves through the room, the way people speak to him. It's hard to describe, like he understands more than he lets on. Or maybe it's just that he listens, properly, without rushing. I paused, read it back, then kept going. People come and go. They sit. They linger. They leave softer than they arrived. No one rushes. No one asks too much. The words weren't trying to be clever. They weren't even for publication. But they felt truer than anything I'd written in weeks. I looked around again. The artist was still sketching. The same couple from yesterday had stopped talking and just sat with their hands lightly touching across the table. Eli was moving through the room with that same ease, pausing just long enough at each table to offer something quiet, a refill, a glance, a small kindness. I wasn't meant to stay in this town. I wasn't meant to write about this place. And yet, I didn't want to leave. Not just yet. I couldn't quite explain it. Not to myself, not to anyone else. But something about this cafe had caught on somewhere in me, like a thread I didn't know was loose. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on top of it. Maybe I'd take the next bus, or maybe I wouldn't. I didn't. A Café Between Worlds, Chapter 2. It seemed the cafe was quieter in the mornings. Not empty, just slower, like the world outside hadn't quite reached it yet. A low golden light stretched across the floor, catching in the steam that rose from mugs like breath. Someone had put on a record, actual vinyl, crackling faintly through the speakers, piano soft and unhurried. I took the same seat as before, by the window. Eli was already behind the counter, arranging pastries under their glass domes. He didn't look up when I walked in. He didn't need to. "Same again?" he called gently. "Why not?" I said. I watched him work, still curious about him, but not in the way I had been on the first day. That had been novelty. This was something else, a kind of quiet study. There was no rush to understand him, but I wanted to see what others saw. Or maybe I just wanted to feel what they felt. Whatever it was that made this place feel like somewhere you could stay forever. He brought the drink over, rest easy, same as before, and set it down with a smile. "You stayed," he said, not surprised. "Only just," I replied, still weighing my options. His smile widened a little, but he didn't say anything else, just gave a small, knowing nod and moved to the next table. I opened my notebook but didn't write anything. Instead, I watched the door. People trickled in slowly, mostly alone, each one greeted with a nod or a smile. No orders were shouted across the room. Eli simply brought them what they always had. Somehow he remembered, or maybe he just guessed right every time. The artist arrived not long after. Red jacket, hair tied back, sketchbook under one arm. She passed by me on the way to her usual seat, then paused. "You came back," she said. "Looks that way." "You're settling in," she said with a knowing glance. "Apparently." She smiled. "Told you, this place has a way." Then she moved on without waiting for a reply. The door opened softly a few minutes later, and a new figure stepped inside. A woman, early 40s maybe, dressed like she hadn't quite decided if she was just out for a walk or running away from something. Windblown hair, jacket half-zipped, a scarf slung over her shoulder like it had been forgotten mid-movement. She glanced around the room as if expecting it to be different, then let out a breath when she saw that it wasn't. She stood just inside the doorway for a moment too long. Eli looked up from behind the counter. "Take your time," he said. "There's no wrong place to sit." She nodded, almost smiled, and crossed slowly to a table in the far corner, facing the window. She didn't order, didn't even take off her coat, just sat with her hands folded in front of her, staring out at the sea like she was waiting for something to form on the horizon. Eli moved without pause. He didn't ask what she wanted, didn't bring a menu, just filled a cup with something pale and fragrant, then carried it over and set it in front of her with a gentle, "This might help." She looked at him surprised, and for a second it seemed like she might say something, but instead she reached for the cup, wrapped her hands around it, and just nodded. From my table, I watched the exchange unfold in complete silence. Nothing strange, nothing dramatic, but the air felt different for a few seconds, slower, quieter. The artist across the room had paused in her sketching, not staring, just still. Then she picked up her pencil again, and Eli walked back behind the counter. I opened my notebook and wrote, "He doesn't fix people, he just offers them something small, something just enough." I wasn't even sure what I meant by that. It was late morning when the rhythm shifted, not suddenly, not loudly, just enough. The bell above the door chimed like always and a man stepped inside. neatly dressed, slightly out of place but not by much, too polished for this town. Jacket pressed, boots too clean for the muddy coastal paths. He paused in the doorway, scanned the room, not curiously but like he was ticking off a memory, and then walked in. Eli was behind the counter, arranging cups. He didn't look up right away. But when he did, something changed in his face. Only briefly. A flicker. Not fear, not surprise. Just a pause. A breath that didn't quite finish. The man smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd still be here." Eli didn't answer. He lowered his gaze and carefully set a cup on its saucer. No one else seemed to notice. The artist kept drawing. An old man near the back turned a newspaper page. But I saw it. The stillness around Eli tightened. Not visibly, but I felt it. Like the light inside had suddenly dimmed. The man didn't approach the counter right away. He looked around the cafe like someone walking through a memory, nostalgic, but unsure of his welcome. I found myself watching Eli more than him. He moved just as he always did. No rushing, no stiffness, but the warmth had dulled. The smile no longer reached his eyes. He brought a tray to the couple near the window, spoke gently as ever. But his voice was just a little quieter, like something in him had folded in on itself. Eventually the man sat down, not far from me, not close to Eli either. He didn't order, just sat, hands clasped, eyes on the counter. Eli didn't go over. The tension was so soft most wouldn't notice, but it was there. The artist across from me had stopped drawing again. Her pencil hovered above the page. When Eli passed by my table, I said nothing, just watched him. He met my eye for a moment, and there was something in it I hadn't seen before. Something very careful, like he was navigating a dangerous path he thought he'd left behind. Then he moved on, and the man waited. The man hadn't touched the menu. He sat quietly, hands folded, gaze fixed toward the counter where Eli had just disappeared into the back. The man looked over at me, mild and polite. "Nice place," he said. "Didn't expect it to feel so still." I offered a faint smile. "It grows on you." He gave a nod. He always liked quiet places. There was a pause, just long enough to wonder what he meant by always. "You know him?" I asked, pointing my finger towards where Eli had disappeared, keeping my tone light. The man glanced back toward the kitchen door. "From a while ago," he said. "Different time, different name." His voice wasn't cold, but careful. "He's doing a great job," I said. The man didn't answer straight away, then softly, "Yeah, looks like he found somewhere." Another pause. "He ever talk about the city?" he asked. I shook my head. He didn't seem surprised, just nodded, lips pressing briefly together. "Well, doesn't matter," he said, more to himself. "I won't stay long." He looked around again, as if trying to match the Eli he remembered with the one who belonged here. "Place suits him," he added. "Wasn't easy back then." And that was all. He stood a few moments later, left without ordering. The bell over the door chimed, and just like that, he was gone. Eli returned soon after. His eyes scanned the room, not urgently, just checking. He didn't ask where the man went. I didn't say anything. But something about him was quieter than before. The warmth was still there, just tucked in a little deeper. Evening had drawn in, and I hadn't moved from my seat. The cafe had emptied slowly until it was just me, a mostly empty mug, and Eli still moving behind the counter like the day hadn't ended. He hadn't asked me to leave. I hadn't tried to. There was no awkwardness to it, just a kind of quiet understanding that I could stay a little longer. He was cleaning, but not with his usual rhythm. I'd watched him long enough by now to know what normal looked like. This wasn't it. He wiped the same section of the counter 3 times, then adjusted the row of cups on the shelf above, twice. His smile was still there, but not in his eyes. The ease had drained out of him, replaced by something mechanical. I watched in silence for a while, then said gently, "Long day?" He gave a soft hum that might have been agreement, or might have been an attempt to sound like agreement. "Eli?" I said. That stopped him, barely, just long enough for the cloth in his hand to hang still. "You all right?" He didn't look at me straight away, just kept his head slightly down, eyes fixed on the cups, as if waiting for them to answer for him. Then, with that practiced ease of his, he gave a smile I didn't quite believe. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice didn't quite land. I didn't press him, just let the quiet stretch between us. I thought maybe he'd say more, maybe he wanted to, but then he moved again, carefully, fluidly, tucking that unreadable calm back over himself like a jacket he'd worn too many times to notice any more. "I'll be closing soon," he said, not unkindly. I nodded. "Course, I'll get going." He glanced at me then, just briefly. "Thanks for staying." That was all. I left the cafe with the sense that I'd missed something important, but not by much. A Cafe Between Worlds, Chapter 3. The next morning, the cafe opened, as it always did. The light through the windows was soft and grey, the sea hidden behind a low roll of mist. A kettle hissed somewhere in the back. Music played low, something old and wordless. From the outside, it looked exactly as it had the day before, but inside the rhythm was off. Eli was moving through the cafe, smile in place, hands steady, but the timing wasn't right. The tea took a few seconds longer to pour. The scones were placed on the counter without their usual sprig of mint. He greeted everyone, but his voice didn't carry quite as far. No one said anything, not at first. But the artist, seated near the window with her sketchbook open and a fresh page untouched, glanced at him more than once. Her pencil didn't move. Thomas sat in his usual chair, stirring his tea even though the sugar had already dissolved. He watched Eli like he was reading weather patterns. And me? I sat at my table, notebook open, but I wasn't writing, just watching. There was nothing wrong exactly, nothing you could point to, just a softness around the edges, a dulled warmth. The sense that Eli was still here, but a little further away than usual. When he brought over my drink, rest easy like always, I noticed the cup was chipped. Not badly, just a little crack near the rim. Eli never served chipped cups. "Thanks," I said quietly. He nodded. "Hope it's still good." "It always is." He smiled at that but didn't linger. Just turned back to the counter and began rearranging the jars of loose-leaf tea for the second time in 5 minutes. No one asked, but no one left either. It was Thomas who eventually spoke first. He waited until the hum of the cafe dipped low again, the soft lull between one wave of conversation and the next. Eli was tidying near the back, wiping down a table that didn't need wiping. His shoulders were too straight, his movements too careful. "Eli?" Thomas said, gently but clearly. "You all right, son?" Eli looked up, caught off guard for half a second. Then he gave a smile, the one that hovered behind his eyes instead of reaching them. "Yeah," he said, "just tired." Thomas nodded slowly, but didn't let it end there. "Well," he said, "if there's something on your mind, you don't have to carry it on your own. We're not just customers, you know that. You're part of this place. We look after our own." Eli stood still for a moment. And something shifted. Not big, not visible to everyone, but I saw it. The way his mouth moved like he was trying to find the right words. The way his hand hovered just slightly at his side. He didn't say much, just nodded gratefully, but it was slower this time, more real. "Thanks," he said, voice softer than before. He turned and went back to the counter, not retreating, just moving quietly, like someone trying to carry something that had grown heavier in the last day. Thomas went back to his tea without fuss, and the room held its quiet, still watchful, still waiting. The cafe moved on, as cafes do. Chairs scraped, kettles hissed, cutlery clinked against ceramic. People talked in low tones about nothing urgent. On the surface, everything had settled. But Eli hadn't. He moved through the cafe with his usual care, but there was a hesitance in him now. Not enough for most people to notice, just a second too long at each table, a momentary worried glance toward the door whenever the bell above it jingled. Then it happened. He was carrying 2 mugs toward the counter. Nothing fancy, just tea for a couple seated near the front. I don't even think he was rushing. But as he stepped past the artist's table, one of the cups slipped from his hand. It hit the floor with a hard, ringing crack, rolled once, spilled. The cafe went still. Not a gasp. Just silence. Eli stood frozen for a breath, staring down at the broken porcelain and the splash of tea now spreading slowly across the tile. For a second, just a second, he looked lost. Then it passed. He crouched quietly and began gathering the pieces. The couple said something about it being all right, not to worry. A few soft chuckles from the room tried to reset the mood, but I saw the way his hands shook as he reached for the last shard. I glanced at the artist. Her pencil was still. Thomas had put down his paper. No one said anything, but in that silence every regular in the room understood something they hadn't the day before. Eli, who never dropped things, who moved like the air bent around him, wasn't all right. The cafe was thinning out. Chairs scraped gently. Teas cooled. The last of the regulars were finishing their conversations, settling their bills, wrapping scarves. Eli moved through it all like he always did, efficient, polite, warm. But the warmth was thinner than usual, like a coat worn on the wrong kind of day. The artist stood up from her table near the window, slipping her sketchbook into a canvas bag. She paused as Eli passed her, clearing an empty teacup. She didn't stop him, didn't ask anything, just reached out, lightly, and touched his arm. Whatever she said, I couldn't hear it. A few words, soft and private. Eli froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it, then gave her a small nod. She left without another word. I watched him cross behind the counter again. The last plate was wiped. The kettle had gone quiet. There was nothing left to do. "You sure you're all right?" I asked casually as I stood. Eli gave a practiced smile. Not cold, just too smooth. "Yeah," he said. "Thanks for asking." He didn't look up. The door closed behind the last customer. I gathered my things. Outside, the town was quiet, lights glowing behind drawn curtains, the sea beyond invisible in the dusk. I didn't know what had shifted, not yet, but something had. And tomorrow I hoped I'd understand a little more than I did today. A Café Between Worlds, Chapter 4. Morning came soft and grey. The cafe opened on time. The blinds were up. The bell above the door gave its usual quiet jingle. The same kettle boiled. The same chairs filled, slowly, sleepily, with the same familiar faces. and Eli was there as normal. He greeted people by name, remembered orders, passed out fresh scones with a faint smile. But there was something distracted in him now. He'd forget to make eye contact. Let the tea steep a little too long. Moved just a bit too quickly from table to table, like he was trying to stay ahead of a thought that kept following him. The regulars noticed. They didn't say anything, but they stayed longer than usual. Conversations ran quieter. Even the artist, usually bent over her sketchbook by now, just sat with her pencil still, eyes following Eli when he passed. I watched too. The change wasn't loud, but if you looked, really looked, it was there. He dropped a clean knife into the wrong drawer and didn't fix it. He wiped down a table twice, but missed the sugar packet sitting in the middle of it. And every time the door opened, he looked up, quickly, sharply, then turned away just as fast. Something was coming. He knew it, and I was starting to think I did too. The door opened. Eli looked up from the counter, and everything about him changed. Only slightly, but I saw it. The stillness, the pause in his breath, the way his fingers brushed against each other, absently. A tiny, unconscious gesture that said more than words. The same man from before stepped inside. Same coat. Same steady, quiet presence. He looked around with that same odd familiarity, as if the place hadn't changed, even if he had. And then, with no hesitation, he took the same table as before, in the back corner. Eli didn't move at first, just stood with his hand resting on a stack of saucers, watching. Then the man looked over at him and gave the smallest nod. Not a greeting, more like a signal, a silent request. "Could I get a coffee?" he asked, his voice low but clear. Eli blinked. Of course. He turned quickly, moving with that same careful grace he always had, but his steps were faster now, sharper. He poured the coffee by hand, even though he usually used the pot. Took longer than usual to pick out a cup. Chose one, set it down, picked another. When he finally brought it over, he kept a careful distance from the table, placing the mug down without meeting the man's eyes. "Thanks," the man said. "You doing all right?" Eli hesitated. Then, "I'm fine." The words were brittle, like something held between two fingers that could snap if pressed. The man nodded once, looked like he might say more, then didn't. Eli waited a second longer than he needed to, then stepped back and returned to the counter. He didn't look over his shoulder. Just started arranging a row of napkins that didn't need arranging. From where I sat, it was clear. He was rattled. His hands were moving too much, straightening things that were already straight, checking the same drawer twice. The artist noticed. Thomas looked up from his paper. No one said anything, but everyone saw it. And I, watching Eli watch the stranger through guarded glances, knew without a doubt that whoever this man was, he wasn't just a visitor. I'd never seen Eli like that. Not guarded, not afraid. But that's what this was. Not panic, not a performance. Just the kind of stillness that comes when someone's trying very hard not to be seen by something they can't look away from. I looked at the man again. He wasn't threatening, not overtly. He just sat there, drinking his coffee like any other customer. But there was something about the way he watched Eli, not with malice exactly, but with history. Like he knew a version of him the rest of us didn't. One that Eli clearly wanted to keep buried. I glanced around the cafe. Thomas had lowered his paper slightly. The artist's sketchbook was still shut. A few others had gone quiet, watching, waiting. No one said a word, but I could tell They felt it too. This wasn't just a strange customer. This man was from Eli's past. And whatever that past looked like, Eli hadn't left it as far behind as he thought. The stranger stayed for a while. Didn't talk. Didn't look around. Just sipped his coffee slowly, like he had nowhere else to be. Eli kept his head down at the counter, cleaning the same spot twice. The clink of a spoon sounded louder than it should have, and Eli flinched. The buzz of conversation didn't return. Even the regulars, used to their slow rhythm of morning gossip and crossword clues, stayed quieter than usual. The stranger didn't glance at anyone else. Not at me, not at the artist. Only at Eli. He just sat with his coat still on, and a look that wasn't quite thoughtful, wasn't quite blank. Just patient. He didn't finish his coffee, left it 3/4 full, set the mug neatly to one side, and stood up without a sound. He didn't say goodbye. He only glanced once toward the counter, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Eli glanced cautiously. The bell above the door gave its soft jingle, and just like that, he was gone. No one said anything right away. Conversations didn't resume. The room didn't fill with laughter. Just the usual background sounds, cutlery on plates, spoons in mugs, but all of it quieter than before. Eli was at the counter again, wiping down a spot that didn't need wiping. His face said nothing, but his hands were still. Thomas stood from his usual seat near the back, slowly. He stretched, casually, like a man used to pretending his joints didn't ache. Then he wandered over to the counter, placed his empty mug down, and gave Eli a nod. Nothing more. When Eli turned away, Thomas stepped lightly over to my table. "You got a minute?" he asked. I nodded. He motioned toward the door, and I followed him outside. The late morning was bright but cold. The town was quiet, the sea a distant hush. Thomas stopped a few steps down the street, not far, just enough to be out of earshot. He didn't look at me right away, just reached into his coat and pulled out a tin of mints. Popped one in, offered me one. I shook my head. Then he said, "You saw what I saw, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. "I think so," I said. He nodded slowly. "That man, the one from earlier. You saw how Eli was." I did. Another long pause. "I've known Eli since he came here. Doesn't talk much about before, never had to, you can tell." He glanced sideways at me. But I've never seen him look at anyone like he looked at that man. "He was scared," I said. Thomas didn't respond to that right away, just slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "Could be nothing," he said, finally nodding. "Could be old ghosts. Could be something worse." His eyes were steady. "But if it's something that might come knocking again, we don't just sit and watch." I looked at him, unsure what to say. Then Thomas added, voice quiet but clear, "I'm not talking about heroics. I'm not an idiot. But if that man's here to pull Eli back into something he got himself out of, he's not going to do it with this town watching." He glanced sideways at me again. "You on board with that?" I didn't answer right away, but I thought of Eli's face behind the counter, the way he'd looked away when the man walked in, the silence in the cafe, the unspoken, shared understanding that whatever had just happened, it wasn't normal and it wasn't safe. "Yeah," I said. "I'm on board." Thomas nodded once. "Good." He turned, walked back inside without another word. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, just long enough to feel the air shift. Something had changed, not just in Eli, but in all of us. A Café Between Worlds, Chapter 5. The next morning passed slowly. The cafe was busy at first. the usual rustle of chatter and clinking cups, but as the lunchtime rush faded, so did the noise. The regulars lingered, not out of hunger, but out of something quieter. An unspoken agreement to be there just in case. Eli moved through it all, present but distracted. He hadn't dropped anything today, but his usual grace was dulled. The rhythm of his movements was just slightly off, like a tune played in the wrong key. Most people didn't say anything. They just watched, waiting for the balance to return. The bell above the door rang. Eli froze. The stranger again. He stepped inside. The same coat. The same unreadable face. He moved with purpose, but without force, and the air shifted around him as if the room had been holding its breath since his last visit. Thomas sat straighter. The artist girl quietly set down her sketchbook and watched. My eyes flicked to Eli, then to the man, then back again, just in time to see the tension tighten in Eli's shoulders. The stranger didn't move toward a table this time. He approached the counter directly, pausing as he reached it. Eli stood behind it, expression blank, ears flattened against his head, hands nervously wringing in front of his chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man placed something down. A small envelope, creased but clean. "I won't stay," he said, his voice low, almost careful. "I just needed to give you this." Eli didn't look down. He didn't speak. The man hesitated. Then, softer, he added, "It's good to see you again, Eli. You look, well." He didn't wait for a response, didn't order anything. He just stepped back, nodded once, not to anyone in particular, and turned to go. The door swung shut behind him, and the cafe fell into silence again. Eli stared at the envelope. He didn't touch it, didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed somewhere beyond it, as if the space in front of him had shifted shape, and he wasn't ready to navigate it yet. At the back of the cafe, Thomas leaned toward me and murmured quietly, "That felt more like goodbye than trouble." I nodded, agreeing, but saying nothing. My eyes were still on Eli, on the way his ears remained flat against his head, the way one hand finally lifted to rest lightly over the envelope, not opening it, just holding it in place. The cafe had gone quiet, not with tension, but with watchfulness. Conversations faded. Cups were set down. People didn't stare exactly, but they noticed. He had opened the envelope slowly, carefully, and now he was reading, right there behind the counter where everyone could see him. He didn't rush. His eyes scanned the letter slowly, absorbing each word in silence. And then he stopped. Something in his face shifted. Not dramatically, but something dropped away. Then, without looking up, he stepped out and walked stiffly to the closest empty chair and table. He sat down like his body had forgotten how to stand. One hand still gripped the letter. His ears were still flattened against his head, and his tail curled in tightly against the leg of the chair. Seeing something was definitely wrong, Thomas crossed the room at once and crouched beside him. Not too close, not crowding, just a steady presence. "You all right, lad?" I followed, moving more slowly, watching Eli closely. Eli didn't look up. He just put the letter on the table in front of him. Then, seeing me approach, he gently nudged it towards me with his fingers. His hand was a little shaky, but the gesture was clear. "You want me to read it?" I asked. Eli gave a tiny nod. Just one. So I carefully took the letter, stepped back slightly so I wouldn't be looming, and began to read it aloud, but softly.
To Eli, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I made sure this would reach you once everything was settled. Before I died, I wanted to be certain, no loose ends, no debts left unpaid. The business, the estate, the blood ties, cut clean. But I've got one debt left, and it's to you, maybe the biggest one of them all. I've been thinking about you more than anything else these past few months, about what you suffered under my roof, what I allowed, what I excused. You were a kid, Eli. Bright, beautiful, so sweet-natured and gentle. Far too gentle, too trusting for the world we dragged you into. And the family betrayed that trust, turned you into something useful, something profitable for the business. I saw your fear and I ignored it. I saw your pain and I looked the other way. I won't pretend the life we lived was clean, it wasn't, and you should never have been part of it. I won't ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. But I will say this. I'm sorry, Eli. Not just with words, but with action. The man who gave you this letter, his name you know, and I hope you didn't fear him when you saw him. He is an honorable man, and I know he was never cruel to you. I chose him to carry this message because I believe he wanted to see you go free as badly as you did. So, inside this envelope, you will find a ring, Eli. Not just any ring. It was custom-made back before I ever made my fortune, by a master smith who owed me his life. The gems in it include an extremely rare blue star sapphire, surrounded by multiple pink diamonds. These are the kind of gemstones people will spend a lifetime trying to find. It's almost priceless. Almost. Certainly worth more than anything I ever gave you while you were under my roof. I know money can't undo the hurt, can't give you back the years stolen from you, but maybe, just maybe, it can make the road ahead a little easier. Sell it, keep it. I don't care, but know this. It's yours, Eli, free and clear, enough to secure you a future, a prosperous one. And wherever you are, if you're safe, if you're happy, I'm glad, truly. I only wish I'd had the courage to do right by you when it would have mattered most. Be free now, my sweet, gentle, furry-eared friend. You don't owe your past a single thing. Go live the life that was always meant to be yours. Luca.
I lowered the page and sat with it for a moment, unsure what to say. The words still hung in the air, fragile and strange, like smoke after a fire. It read like a confession, an apology. Maybe even a farewell from someone who'd once had power, real power. Not the political kind, not corporate either. The kind that moves in shadows, leaves no records and settles its debts in blood and diamonds. I glanced at Eli. Was he part of something? Was he mafia? I asked quietly. Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said enough. By the time I realized how quiet the cafe had gotten, more people had come closer. They hadn't rushed or crowded. It just happened, quietly, instinctively. A few had drifted from their tables, others stood nearby with cups in hand, all of them focused on Eli. There wasn't a sound apart from the faint hum of the coffee machine still ticking over behind the counter. No one had known what he'd come from. Not really. And now, hearing it laid bare like that, what he'd been through, what he'd survived, the whole cafe seemed to shift around him. A few of them looked stunned. One of the older women had a hand to her mouth. The artist in the red jacket had stopped drawing entirely, sketchbook now resting forgotten in her lap. Eli didn't move. He just sat with both hands flat on the table, eyes fixed on nothing. His ears were still drawn back flat against his head, and his shoulders were low, not tense, just still, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. His lips moved barely, a whisper. It's finally over. Thomas was beside him, one hand resting gently on his shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. The ring caught a glint of light as I tucked it away and passed it gently to Eli. He didn't look down, just closed his hand around it slowly. A fresh cup of tea appeared beside him. Someone had thought of it and brought it over without a word. Another regular gave his back a soft pat before pulling up a chair and sitting nearby, close but not crowding. A few others followed, quietly gathering, not standing over him, but easing into the space around him. Someone reached across the table and gave his arm a brief squeeze. No one asked anything. No one filled the silence. But they were there, in the only way that mattered. He looked up, not all the way, just enough to see them. No judgment, no shock, only warmth. And something steadier than words. Unspoken loyalty, quiet compassion, a kind of kindness that didn't ask anything from him in return. He gave the smallest nod, and they understood. He wasn't ready to speak, but the fear in his face had softened. No one pressed for answers, but the offer was clear. In every glance, every quiet gesture. If he ever wanted to talk, they'd be here for him. A month had passed. The ring was auctioned through a discreet private house in the capital. It sold for just over 1.2 million. A small feature ran in the back pages of the Sunday paper. Most people didn't notice it. But around here, some things changed. The local youth football team got new kit. A few broken windows at the community centre were replaced. There were whispers of a quiet bursary fund for struggling families. No one could quite trace where it came from, but people were grateful just the same. The cafe stayed warm, familiar. Eli stayed behind the counter, smiling more than he used to. He laughed more easily now. Not all the time, but often enough that people noticed. He'd moved out of his damp, crumbling flat and into a tiny cottage on the edge of town, just close enough to hear the sea. And when the stranger returned one afternoon, just for coffee, just to sit, Eli served him without flinching. They spoke only briefly, but when the man left, Eli stood a little taller, a little lighter. The past hadn't disappeared, but it didn't own him anymore. The cafe kept going, cups were poured, stories were told. Days unfolded gently, one into the next. Outside, the seasons shifted. Inside, something softer had taken root, something no one mentioned out loud, but everyone felt. And Eli? He stayed. Same hours, same apron, same gentle voice taking orders over the hum of steam. Only now, he wasn't listening for footsteps behind him. And for the first time, the life he was living felt like it actually belonged to him.